Alright, man, peace. You know, brothers, I get a very bad rap on this channel for being a quote-unquote Kobe Bryant hater. And what I constantly try to communicate to Kobe Bryant's fans about is that I'm not a hater of Kobe Bryant. He is an all-time great player. I just believe that he's probably the most overrated all-time great NBA player in the history of the league. They dispute that, of course, because that's what they're supposed to do. They're fans. But it is what it is. I expect that because through experience, I know that Kobe Bryant's fan base is highly emotional, highly irrational. But at least they have a leg to stand on in many of their assertions. They'll say things like Kobe Bryant is a 5-time NBA champion. Kobe Bryant was dominant in the 2001 series against the Spurs. Things of that nature. Those are the normal refrains from Kobe Bryant's fan base, albeit his emotional fan base. But what I've always stated is that if there is any fan base that is more obnoxious than the Kobe Bryant fan base, it's the Allen Iverson fan base. And it's because they are completely irrational and illogical. And why is that? It's because Allen Iverson was one of the patron saints of dumb niggas back in the late 90s, early 2000s. He really was. And a lot of people are not going to like that. It's okay. Allen Iverson was an all-time great NBA talent. If we were going to make a list of the most naturally talented and gifted players in the history of the NBA, Allen Iverson would probably be top 5. But if we're going to make a list of the greatest players in the history of the NBA, on my list, he'd definitely be top 50. Maybe even top 40. But I would have to look down the list name by name to see exactly who's there. But why am I saying all this? Because Stephen Jackson, the resident quote-unquote OG of the NBA, and as I've stated repeatedly on this channel, there's a difference between an OG and an elder. An elder is going to teach you about history, culture, and he's going to utilize wisdom, meaning an understanding on how to make the right decisions based on experience. What an OG is going to do, basically, an OG is just an older version of himself, but he's still the same person that he always was. So he could tell you where he made missteps, but that does not necessarily mean that he himself even learned from his mistakes. Because he'll normally do the same things over and over again until he's finally dead. That's usually what an OG is. And nothing against Stephen Jackson, but he's an OG of the NBA. He's not an elder. He actually had the gall to sit down here on Colin Cowherd's show and state that Allen Iverson is a greater player than Isiah Thomas of the Detroit Pistons was. And I was not surprised by it because, once again, Allen Iverson was very representative of that era. And Stephen Jackson, he was of that era. He came into the NBA around that 98, 99, 2000 area where Allen Iverson was truly changing the culture of the NBA. When Iverson and Kevin Garnett and a lot of those guys started to come into the NBA, into the league in the mid-90s, really starting with Shaq and Chris Webber, they brought in much more of the hip-hop aspect. And the NBA was alarmed at first, but they were not too concerned because you still had the old guard of players that were drafted in the mid-80s. The Michael Jordans, the Charles Barkleys, the Hakeem Olajuwons, the Patrick Ewings, the Reggie Millers, the Scottie Pippens, the Karl Malones, the John Stocktons, who they felt like could moderate the NBA and who they could push more while the younger players develop. And while those older players were still winning championships well into the mid to late 90s, they were trying to figure out exactly what they were going to do about this issue, borderline problem, with this quote-unquote gangster rap mentality and culture that was being brought into the league. And Allen Iverson became the face of it. He was truly the guy who implored not only other NBA players, but the viewers at home to not only accept the quote-unquote gangster rap culture, but if you never knew about it, you should embrace it. And that's a culture that has been deleterious to the so-called black community. And of course, it had a deleterious effect on society at large and also the NBA because the ratings started to go down. Allen Iverson, pound for pound, inch for inch, was probably more physically talented than Isiah Thomas. And Isiah Thomas was freakishly physically talented, quiet as kept. He could dunk a basketball with ease as well. He had phenomenal stop-start acceleration as well, great hand-eye coordination. It's just not as exalted as Iverson because Iverson had bigger hands than Isiah Thomas, so he could dunk a basketball much easier than Isiah Thomas could. Point being is this: they were close physically. Mentally, they were not even close. So you always have to understand why certain people tell you who their favorite player is and what that represents. Like the scriptures tell you, you shall know a tree by its fruit. When you examine a person and they tell you about who their favorite basketball player is, or football player is, or writer is, or whatever notable figure they choose to align themselves is. You learn a lot about them, or you learn a lot about that entity that they're talking about if all you know is them. Because people are going to gravitate to those that are like them. And we know Allen Iverson was not a wise person at all. He really wasn't. He was someone who was very fortunate to have certain forces around him, especially Reebok, who seemed to understand that he was someone who was just a good basketball player and not a good decision maker, make certain life decisions for him to protect him from himself. And Steven Jackson is someone who is also very fortunate that he can talk basketball, or who knows where he'd be right now, and I'm pretty sure that he'd tell you that himself. I'm not trying to get too nuanced, quote unquote, per se on this topic, or too, quote unquote, deep about it. But at the end of the day, you do learn a lot about people based on who they claim they associate with or who they have an affinity for. Isiah Thomas was known as being a player who could beat you with his brain, not just with his skills. Allen Iverson was never known as that type of player. And you'll hear many of his fans say, well, you know, Allen never really had any help. That's not true. When he first came to the 76ers, they had Jerry Stackhouse there. Allen Iverson did not want to be a classic point guard, so he ran Stackhouse off the team. They had to build a team around him, very similar to the LeBron James system. They had to build a team that totally was catered to what Iverson could do well and what he couldn't do well. And for a year or so, they had a certain level of success. But when you combined two forces that tended to alienate those around them, both Allen Iverson and Larry Brown, they were never going to last long. Isiah Thomas was able to team up with the CIA operative, allegedly CIA operative Chuck Daly, and maximize his winning potential. Let me correct that. Let me say CIA affiliate Chuck Daly. And maximize his winning potential in earning 2 world championships. And what did Isiah do in the process? He minimalized his own game. You understand? He became a minimalist on the basketball court. Instead of going in between the legs 5,000 times like he would in the early 80s, he distributed the basketball. And he didn't make passes just to get an assist like you'll see from Russell Westbrook today. He actually got hockey assists. He would pass the ball to a player who then would pass the ball to the player who would score. These are selfless things that Isiah Thomas did that set him apart from a player like an Allen Iverson. Allen Iverson was just not a good thinking man's player on the basketball floor. And his fan base is a reflection of that, because they tend to not think the game particularly well. That's why they gravitate towards him. But let me also say this. Allen Iverson had an underdog aura around him that tended to attract certain people from the environment that he was from. But let me also say this. Just because you're from a certain locality, environment, or quote-unquote hood per se, does not mean that you have to restrict yourself in your understanding of what you're capable of. Allen Iverson did a lot of pandering to his quote-unquote origins. He was always trying to push or exemplify what he thought he was supposed to be for his so-called hood, as opposed to demanding better of himself and therefore demanding better of where he came from. Isiah Thomas, on the other hand, we all knew that he was from an extremely rough environment, probably rougher than Allen Iverson's upbringing. But he did not wear that on his sleeve. He became a better person because of it. So anyway, let's let Colin Cowherd and Steven Jackson speak about their disagreement about Isiah Thomas versus Allen Iverson. Of course, they're going to talk about it. I'm going to chime in.
That's about. But
Allen Iverson don't have a championship.
Yeah, but Allen Iverson's not as good as Magic or Isiah. That's because he didn't have any championships. You don't think Isiah Thomas is held in higher esteem than Iverson?
Not to me.
What?
Not to me.
Right there, Colin Cowherd, he's telling you a lot about himself. You shouldn't be shocked. I wasn't shocked when he said that. For those of you who did not see this conversation, it started with Colin Cowherd making an assertion, or pretty much repeating what Andre Iguodala stated about Steph Curry. Andre Iguodala basically said that Steph Curry does not really get the respect he deserves. Colin Cowherd basically tried to take what Andre Iguodala stated and raise it up another notch by alleging that Steph Curry is the second greatest point guard of all time, which he's not, because Steph Curry is not really a point guard. He's more of a combo guard. That's why I liken him more to a Jerry West or a Pistol Pete Maravich than a Magic Johnson or an Isiah Thomas. Steph can pass, of course. He can make fancy passes. But I'm not quite sure if he's someone that you want to be running your offense on a consistent basis because he does have lapses of judgment in his decision making. I would not even put Steph Curry in that conversation of greatest point guard of all time. He's so transformative that what he's shown is that the Pistol Pete archetype could win championships. That's what he's shown. And that's what I give him credit for. Anyway, that's how that conversation started. And it turned into this Allen Iverson conversation because Steven Jackson brought it up in relation to Isiah Thomas.
Isiah Thomas, best ball handler league history.
He's definitely a great, but I think AI was a better player.
Well, we just disagree on that.
Yeah, we disagree on that.
Isiah Thomas, another guy, he played.
Let me say this real quick. I'm going to say this real quick. A lot of people who make those type of statements about how they think that Allen Iverson is a better player than Isiah Thomas, those are the same type of guys who say that they would start their team with Kobe Bryant. And right away, you'd realize that if you don't have the right coach and the right system with Kobe Bean, you're not going to win anything. Because his personality is going to alienate all his teammates and he's going to end up going out in the first round. He's much more like Russell Westbrook personality-wise than Michael Jordan. And I'm talking about Kobe Bryant. He has an issue being able to truly raise the level of his team unless he has the right components around him. Michael Jordan was able to take his team to the Eastern Conference Finals even before Phil Jackson took over. But just to get back to the point of the video, if Steven Jackson were to have the opportunity to play 82 games with Allen Iverson and then play 82 games with Isiah Thomas, I promise you he would change his tune right away. Allen Iverson may have been more fun to watch on TV, and I think that that's the confusion that Steven Jackson has, in my personal opinion, in my view. He was more fun to watch on television, but he did not play a winning style of basketball, and you have many of his fans will say, you know, the NBA, they were trying to stop AI from winning. Not only did the NBA not try to stop AI from winning, they tried to help him win. Because in the 2001 playoff run, the Philadelphia 76ers got so many calls against the Raptors and against the Milwaukee Bucks in the Eastern Conference Finals that they should not have gotten, because the NBA knew that Iverson was going to get the highest ratings in the finals when they finally faced off against the LA Lakers. They could create this David versus Goliath matchup paradigm. That's what they were concerned with. So no, they were not trying to hold AI back. AI held himself back because of his very low basketball IQ.
He and Stockton played in the Magic era. So it's like Phil Mickelson played when Tiger was crushing it. So people forget how
Isiah
great
was a dog. I love
Isiah Thomas.
Now Steven Jackson trying to make up for it. Colin Cowherd is saying something very pertinent. Let me rewind this back just a little bit.
Is it?
Just a little bit.
Well, we just disagree on that.
Yeah, we disagree on that.
Isiah Thomas, another guy, he played. He and Stockton played in the Magic era. So it's like Phil Mickelson played when Tiger was crushing it. So people forget how
Isiah
great.
was a dog. I love
Isiah Thomas is one of the all-time great basketball players, best ball handler league history.
Absolutely. He's certainly in the top 5 highest basketball IQs, team basketball IQs of any player in the history of the league. And let me also say this about Isiah Thomas that many people don't understand. Isiah Thomas was a 2 or 3-time first-team All-NBA point guard in the Magic Johnson era. Many people do not grasp that. Magic Johnson did not achieve the first-team All-NBA accolade every year in the 1980s. Isiah Thomas was the recipient of that accolade 2 or 3 times in the early 80s. And then once again, he dimmed his game down to assist his team in winning and give his team a better chance to win, which is something that Allen Iverson never did over the course of his career. He was more concerned about scoring as many points as he could and, remaining in the spotlight as the top scorer in the NBA.
Competitor.
Oh, tough. Get in fights. Oh, he was great.
My type of guy.
Yeah, me too. I love getting in fights.
I agree with that. Steven Jackson would have fit in very well on those bad boy teams, especially coming off the bench. But anyway, peace.